creating tiling textures. In this video you will understand what a tiling texture actually is. We'll be aiming for a basic texture, so nothing really complicated at this point. We'll be creating a tiled texture for the walls of our church. And finally, understand getting it looking right will take time, and that's why we are aiming for a basic texture at this point, and then you can add to it as you so wish. Okay, so before we hop on over into Blender, we'll have a look at some quick tiling examples. So first of all, we'll actually start with a tiled texture. Now it's called tiled because it repeats, just like tiles in a kitchen, a bathroom, or anywhere else you might have tiles. Think of a roof, that's a common place you'd have tiles, a roof tiles. Anyway, enough about what tiling actually is. Now this itself is a tiled texture. You cannot see the seams. You don't know by looking at that where they are joined together. Now what you can see, and I've made sure that this is apparent, is there are some red bricks, the yellow bricks might jump out to you, we're all slightly different, but you can see the repetition. Now if the repetition itself is a pattern in a structure, that's absolutely fine because it doesn't break the illusion. However, you do have to make sure, if you want to create a realistic effect, you very rarely would get a repeating pattern so uniform as the one in front of us here. But in comparison to a non-tile texture now on the right, now I tried to get the colours similar and it didn't work at all, but apologies for that. Now you can see the seams of where these things actually join together. There are in fact harsh breaks where the image ends and the image starts again. Now that will break the illusion, and you can generally only get away with non-tiled textures when they're a one-off instance. If you start trying to tile textures that are not supposed to be tiled, I haven't had the forethought put into them to make sure that they can be tiled, then it's going to stand out like a sore thumb. The other thing to bear in mind is that if your texture covers the entire surface of the area that you want and no tiling is necessary, then of course a non-tile texture is absolutely fine. Brilliant. So let's go create a tiling texture now over in Blender. Okay, so back over in Blender, what we are going to need to do here is, I'm going to adjust my screen space that I've got going on here, and I need a UV image editor and not much else. So I'm going to use the one at the top here, so I'm just going to collapse these down a little. It's great collapsing. And switch this to UV image editor. Okay, so now we're in the UV image editor. Let's create a tiled texture. So I am going to create a new image, and I'm going to call it tiled texture. We're also going to learn about a few different brush types in a moment. I'm going to leave it at 1024, but when I come to the real version, I'll probably increase that just a little bit more. And I'm going to click OK, and we're going to end up with a black texture because that's the default color we set. I'm also going to go ahead straight away and go save as an image, and I'm going to call this tile texture example. I'm going to increase the number of letters I've got there, and I'm going to go ahead and open up that image to make sure that is the one that I am working on. Tile texture example. Brilliant. So now that we've got this up, let's go and have some fun. Now the tiling option is very quick and straightforward. So I'm going to open up the tool shelf, the UV image editor, and go to the header bar and change the mode to paint. Now when we change the mode to paint, it's remembered some of the previous colours we've got, which is brilliant. But if we scroll down here, we have the last one in the line is tiling, unless of course you've moved it. But tiling here has X and Y tiling, and in this case, because it's a square texture, we're going to want to turn both on. Now the great thing about this, and I'll demonstrate with this colour we seem to be using lots of, or certainly I seem to be using lots of. I'm going to turn the radius of my brush down a little. When I'm on this side, you can see it automatically points and paints on the other side as well. Now that is very powerful. It does the bottom as well because we've got the Y one. It means that if you're putting detail in on one side, it starts adding it to the other side as well. So you can see very quickly how that can become very, very useful. So for instance, if we wanted to create a basic brick structure, let's say that's this colour, not quite sure I like that color, but we'll work with it. I can go down here to the paint stroke menu on the tool shelf here. So a paint stroke, we open it up, there's a series of stroke methods, and we can change that. And of course, if you're working, you will want a different set of options. And for instance, brickwork is quite straight, so I'm going to use the line option. I'm also going to make the brush a little bit smaller there. And well, the line is you click and hold, and you can drag a line. Now, of course, whenever you're working with a tile texture, it is very easy to forget that you need to do the top and bottom as well. If this was a brick that we were working on, you would see straight away that at the top here and at the bottom, when this was joined together, well, it would look like a giant brick. So we'd have to go somewhere in the middle and do that, and that would be across there. And then, of course, if you were doing the brick texture itself, it'd be every other one if you were going uniform. And then let's say here, 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 and here. Now, of course, you need to remember that there will be one here on the top leading edge, just like the top and bottom, and one here as well. And there you go, you've now got a basic tiled repeating brick texture that we can go and play with straight away. But before we go and just apply this quickly to one of our models, let's just think about certain things that are going on here. Now, we are aiming to create a diffuse texture at this point in time, and I say that because I do mean avoiding putting on any light. So it's very tempting to add shadow where it might be darker, but with literally thinking about the colour. So when you finish and you just apply this texture, it is going to look bland and flat. And that is okay. That is the look we're actually going for. It's absolutely fine. We'll deal with that later on with our normal and bump maps. We won't be dealing with that at this point in time. In fact, we want it to be as neutral as possible with only colour information there. Now, one thing to consider, as I was drawing across here, I failed to line up my brickwork. So if I just undo a couple of these back to here, I'm going to exaggerate here, you try and do a line and it doesn't work out straight. Well, there's a very quick tip for that one if you're doing that sort of thing, and that is to switch it back to space. That was the default one we were working on, and just put a dot on the edge. Once you've got a dot on the edge, of course, you can play dot to dot and line the two things up, and then you won't get too much of a distortion as you join them together. Of course, you can zoom in and out on your screen as well, and that helps you work on finer details. So I'm going to have to really quickly just create this mapping again, or not mapping, this brickwork. As you can see, it's very quick and easy, he says, to put it together without too much fuss. And I'm not going to make a very detailed block work at the moment, but there we go. That's our default texture that I'm going to work with here. Now, do remember to save your image. So I'm going to save the image there, and we're ready to go. I just need to open up the 3D view, and I'm going to find something. In fact, I'm just going to create a cube to demonstrate this with you. So I'm going to use this texture now in another instance of Blender. I'm going to open up a new blend file, and I'm going to make sure I'm in cycles for this example, and I'm going to open up the node editor. Well, let's give this cube a material first of all. So we've got one. I'm going to call it tiled texture, because it's important that when you're mapping your texture, you need to tell Blender how to map it. So let's go in and use nodes and switch to the node editor. Okay, that's very small. If you can't read that, then I certainly can't read that. So I'm going to switch this to the viewport here to material shading, so we can see what's going on. Now, of course, what do I need? I need to tell it I'm going to use a texture, so I'm going to add in a texture, and I'm just going to type in texture, and we do want texture coordinates, so we might as well put that in, because we need to tell it how it is applied. And then we're going to go to texture and image texture. Of course, I could have searched for that as well. I'm going to UV map an image texture, and the color output goes to there. Of course, there is no image at the moment, so let's go ahead and open up the image we just saved. okay, and it doesn't work too well. Well, that's because we haven't unwrapped it at all. So let's go ahead, UV image editor, hop over here and unwrap our model. And oh, it's already popped it on straight away. That's pretty neat. And well, yes, I want every face to contain that one texture, which is absolutely fine. And you can see here there are areas where it looks absolutely brilliant as it goes around the corner. It looks like there's a solid brick there. And there are areas where it doesn't look so hot, like here where it's some sort of, oh, I don't know, sort of Tetris shape trying to fit into that. It doesn't work anyway. And this is where unwrapping your model and controlling where the seams go can help massively. Of course, if we don't see that part of the model and we're only looking at this end, that's absolutely fine as well. Now, if we hop back into the node editor itself, there's a couple of ways that we can go about controlling this texture itself, because at the moment the only control we've got is how the UV image is actually mapped to it. However, there's some other mapping requirements that we can fulfill. So if we go to the node editor, and we need, as I keep mentioning, mapping. How is this texture mapped? And if we add a node in called the mapping node, it's under vector under here and mapping, or of course you can search for mapping, and I'm going to put it in between the texture coordinates and the image texture. And it basically does something with the vector coordinates of our image. And the one that I'm really interested in here of all of these things is the scale part of it. Now, I'm only interested in X and Y. Z will not do anything when you're talking about a 2D texture. However, X and Y, the higher those go, the more repeats there are on the surface. So if I go and put in 2 on the X and 2 on the Y, we end up with, well, 1, 2, 3, 4 times as many repeats than there was before. And as you can see, that's starting to look quite neat. I quite like this rough one that I've done here. Much better than those 2 examples I showed you before. And obviously you've got fine control over this, so if you want it a little taller or shorter, you can play with that to your heart's content. If you go into negative numbers, it actually just turns the image upside down or flips it round. And of course you can make things bigger as well, so we can go 0.5 and 10, and then that looks absolutely ridiculous, or 10 and 10, and that looks like a very big brick wall. In fact, because these are all quite bland in colour, they don't stand out near as bad as the other examples I showed you earlier. Okay, so now you're armed with that knowledge, you've guessed it, it's time for a challenge. Okay, I'd like you to finish off the wall texture. Now remember, you're creating a diffuse texture, so whilst you could add highlights and shadows and lots of more detail just in this one texture itself, we're going to do that later on with real geometry and some other maps. That will also allow us to control where shadows are, because it will be affected by the lights that are in the scene. Now if you are unsure, grab some reference images. You certainly don't want your church with the same brick wall that I've just made, so I'm probably going to have to recreate that or scale it completely differently to get the right effect. And finally, of course, it's no use as just an image, apply it to the church walls. One final thing that I would advise is that you're lean about your process. So if you have just followed along and made a texture, even if it's not really right for your church walls, go ahead and apply it anyway, just to see if you're going to run into any problems before you go ahead and make this wonderful texture that you want to place on the wall. Obviously those things can be done asynchronously, but we need to make sure that the model itself of the church is good enough that we can map to it really well. Pause the video now and give that a go. Okay guys, welcome back. Let's go add a wall texture over in Blender. Okay, so back over in Blender, I did say that I'd probably recreate it, but in the spirit of being lean, let's go see how that texture I've just created actually works on our model. Now I've got a sneaking suspicion I might have a few issues going on here, so I'm going to open up, what do I want here? I want to see what's going on, and I don't have an outliner open, so let's go ahead and open up the outliner. that I'm just going to be a bit mono with what I'm doing here. So I want to see everything in my scene. Brilliant. And I want the main camera not to be focused on this anymore. So where's the camera? Let's switch to it as the main view. Excellent. And I'm just going to make sure everything is turned on to see what's going on. Now, the first thing I will want to do is select this, and it's called main floor. I'm just going to change that because it's not the floor anymore, it's everything. So I'm just going to call it building, and I think this itself is going to be my problem. Building indeed, and because it's all linked together, I think it's going to be a real pain to unwrap with its modular design. So let's just see how it works out, and then we can take it from there. So I'm going to select everything. Of course, there's only one half to select, and I'm going to hit unwrap. Object has a non-uniform scale. There's an error come up on the info header. Now, this is something that happens when you UV unwrap, as mentioned in the problems you get with UV unwrapping. In object mode, we can see here my scale is -10, -10, 1. So we need to apply that scale. So I'm going to go to Object and Apply, and I'm going to do Rotation and Scale, and therefore everything is exactly the size it is in front of us, which is really useful. So let's go ahead and apply the texture. So let's go find it first of all. It's not in my scene at the moment, so let's go ahead and open it. Oh, where did I store it? It was in Resources. So there's my tile texture that I've been working on. I need the 3D view. I'm really going through now, and in here, let's unwrap it and switch to not the rendered mode, but just material mode. I'm moving a camera about at the moment, so I don't want to move away from that. Right, that doesn't seem to have applied the texture yet, because it won't have done. Let's go to the node editor. In fact, has the material been set up to use nodes? That's the question. No, so I'm going to tick use nodes, add in an image texture, and we'll need the texture coordinates. Bit of a sight problem going on there if I'm working at that distance. Let's go ahead and add the image texture as well. Link those together. Now it's loaded up. I should be able to pick it up from here. Right. The UV mapping probably won't work at this point. Yes, it looks horrible. We can see, just about see in the top left there. Let's go ahead and try one of the other unwrap methods. I'm going to use Smart UV Correct, and I'm going to add a little bit of a margin in there as well. Okay, so that's a bit better. Now if I add a mapping node and bring this lot all together, this is just so I can get a feel of it. I wouldn't want to go and create a load of texture based upon a model that wasn't going to work too well. So let's go to Vector, add a mapping node, and I think I'm going to have to increase these dramatically by looking at it. Okay, that's kind of looking good. Now you can see where it joins. In the middle here, there's this kind of double texture going on, but that's okay. This is the floor. We don't need to worry about that. However, I am a little bit concerned with the wall being, well, the way the wall is. It's got all the bricks going vertically instead of horizontally. Now it's an interesting look to the wall, I suppose, and for the moment I'll have to just imagine it's not there. I can see that probably we're going to have to do a bit of remodeling here. Let's see how that looks when I render it out. So let's go ahead and render. I'm going to make this one full screen. I've not used this one in a while. Shift and space to just make that all full screen. Now that is actually looking not too bad. Okay, so I can work on that. I think these bricks probably need to be a little smaller and facing the right way. But I do believe we now need to take in consideration our model and the mapping we're doing to it with textures. Because if we just do it like we're doing at the moment, it's going to be a real pain to try and map that brickwork texture, or any other texture for that matter, to the model. Because at the moment it's one gigantic room. So, how did you guys get on? Did you come across some of these challenges as well? If you did, don't worry, because in the upcoming lectures we'll go ahead and sort that out. Please share your work in the discussions, and I will see you guys in the next lecture.